Okay, thank you all for joining us. Um, when I emailed Shera asking her if she'd be interested in presenting, my first thought, knowing her as I do, was her psychology background, her therapist background. She wrote me back, but I just said the topic will be up to you. And then Shera emailed me back and said, "There's enough of that other stuff going on. I have a different idea." And when I heard the idea, I said, "This is going to be fabulous. It's going to be fun. It's going to be entertaining. It's going to be educational. It's going to be Shera." So at this point, I would like to open up the floor to Shera Dubitsky and thank her in advance for what I'm sure will be fun, educational, and fantastic all around. Shera.
Thank you, Eliza. So as you were saying, for obvious reasons, most presentations by those of us in the mental health field have focused on the coronavirus and how to cope. And I myself actually presented several online workshops on this topic. So I decided to take a break and share a more lighthearted approach to some very important life lessons. So my topic tonight is the Wizard of Maggid, lessons we can learn from Bnei Israel and Dorothy. So several years ago, I was surfing channels and I came across The Wizard of Oz, and I decided to watch it since I hadn't seen it for a long time. And it happened to have also been a few weeks past post-Pesach, and it was like having deja vu. And I had a sudden epiphany that watching The Wizard of Oz was like sitting through Maggid. Obviously, each enjoyed maybe with a few glasses of wine, but even without the wine, I stand by my epiphany. So to bring you along on my journey of the Yellow Brick Road, I decided that I would structure my presentation by showing an example of a comparison of The Wizard of Oz to Maggid, and then share some thoughts and takeaways from each comparison. Before I start, keep in mind that I did work at Shera for many years, and many of my insights and takeaways were developed when I was working with women who were living with breast cancer or ovarian cancer. And that being said, I also shared some of my insights with friends who are struggling with a variety of issues, and it's clear that these insights can be applied universally, particularly during this very challenging time. So I hope that you will find that the takeaways are applicable in your own lives during this pandemic and well beyond. So let's go. The Wizard of Oz follows the story of Dorothy, a young farm girl from Kansas who feels oppressed at home. On a dark and stormy day, she is miraculously swept away in the tornado, and she survives and lands in Munchkin City. The journey ahead of her is unknown. Maggid recounts the many years of oppression that Bnei Israel suffers. Bnei Israel also survives many deadly storms, and they now embark on a journey out of Mitzrayim. And the journey for them is also filled with unknowns. So my takeaway is, I was speaking with somebody who was diagnosed with cancer, and she was describing the experience as being on a roller coaster. There's lots of ups and downs. And even as she was ascending, she said that it was hard to completely enjoy her life because she was always focused on the next scary drop, the next hardship. The moment that she received her diagnosis may have actually been the hardest part because there were so many unknowns facing her as she embarked on this medical and emotional ride. So I reminded her that she had proven to herself that she survived the original hard. Since then, there have been several ups and downs. So I ran with her roller coaster metaphor, reminding her that if she looked behind, she could see that she had survived the previous drops. And I suggested that instead of looking at each ascension and drop, she should pan out and see the full ride. Because her cancer journey already had ups and downs, she could probably anticipate that there would be more to come. So we shifted her focus to help her see that she can keep moving forward, recognizing that she can face hardships ahead of her because of her history of having already survived earlier hardships. So I'm reminded of a inspirational speaker, Steve Harvell, that my husband's company had hired to speak to top salespeople. So he says to the hundreds of people in the room, he says, I want you all to raise your hand as high as you can, right? Just stretch. And so the people do. And he says, okay, everybody stretch as high as you can. Yup. Okay, how about just a little bit more? And everybody goes a little bit more. And he says, okay, are you guys maxed out? And he looks around and he sees that everybody's nodding. He goes, okay, one last time, a little bit stretch more. And so he said that, you know, obviously when we thought we had given everything that we could, there was a little bit more to give. And just when we think we have nothing left, we somehow can find the strength and see that we can take on a little bit more. My daughter served in the Israeli army, as many of you know, and the unofficial motto of her unit is, the hard we shall do today, the impossible we shall do tomorrow. And this reminds me that I can push myself just a little bit more, even in those moments that I feel most challenged or am overwhelmed by the unknown journey ahead. Back to the story. Dorothy's house lands on the Wicked Witch of the East and kills the witch. The witch no longer has the power to bring harm. Prior to her journey onto the Yellow Brick Road, Glinda, the Good Witch, bestows on Dorothy the Wicked Witch's treasured ruby slippers. Hashem brought deadly plagues to Egypt. Paro and the Mitzrayim no longer have the power to harm Bnei Israel. Prior to embarking on their journey, Bnei Israel is told to take the treasured belongings belonging to the Mitzrayim. So the takeaway is that it reminds me that we can receive riches and treasures and unexpected rewards, even from those people who either hold a neutral place in our life or perhaps even from those who brought us harm. I've learned to have a different perspective on toxic people or toxic interactions in my life. So I'm thinking, you know, going back to college, a professor would create a test and then give it to the proctor to administer the test, along with those little blue books. I'm pretty sure most people had that, right? And so the proctor would sit there and collect the test with our little blue books and then give it to the professor to grade. And there were certainly times in my college career when I was standing in front of the professor and I had to defend my answer. I believe that God creates tests for us, and sometimes they come in the form of a toxic interaction. And how I respond to that interaction, this test, it's on me. One day I imagine that I am going to be standing in front of God with my blue book, and he's going to say, walk me through that answer. And I want to be sure that I can answer it with dignity and integrity. So one time I'm standing in Poppy's Bagels and I'm wearing kind of this like skirt, like pants with a tunic shirt, and I'm wearing a scarf on my head like Rambam. And this slick 30-year-old guy who I don't know walks in, he kind of looks me up and down and he says, oh, I was wondering who parked their camel outside. So clearly he was making fun of me and was being degrading. And so I said to him, you know what? I can't thank you enough, because that's exactly the look that I was going for. When I moved to Israel, my ideal would actually be to carpool my kids on a camel. So I actually appreciate the recognition. So he thought he was insulting me, but he was really speaking truth. I dress hoping that at any moment I'm going to be making Aliyah and living on a yishuv. So I own the truth. And I believe that Hashem sent me the test to own who I am. I wanted to be proud to defend that answer. So with the proctor, the person removed from the equation, it just becomes something between me and God. And so if I focus on the person or the toxic situation, I will continue to re-aggravate myself. If I see it as a test from God, I can take the sting out and move forward. And I kind of think that maybe God would even chuckle at that response. Back to the story. So Dorothy is told that she has to follow the yellow brick road to Emerald City to see the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, who has the power to send her home. Along her journey, she meets the Scarecrow, who believes that he has no brain, the Tin Man, who worries that he has no heart, and the Cowardly Lion, who thinks he's lacking courage. They each believe that they have a pre-existing condition that assumes influence over the present circumstances. They each believe that they were somehow missing something or that they were somehow impaired, just like Moshe. When Hashem calls to Moshe to return to Mitzrayim and deliver the children of Israel from bondage, Moshe says, I'm not good with words. He focuses on what he's lacking rather than on his strengths. So what's the takeaway? We are so hard on ourselves. We are naturally drawn to our negative faults. And, I was thinking about like when I choose pictures to put in my Simcha albums, right? I spend so much time examining each picture in detail. One hair is sticking out here, my dress is draped oddly there. And I'm scouring the pictures, looking for the slightest difference between one picture from the next. And after hours and hours, I choose the pictures for the photo album. So I get the album back and I show the album to my friends who literally, and by the way, totally appropriately, spend 7 to 10 seconds per page. They pan out and they see our totality. So beautiful, everybody looks great. And I still go back up those albums and see those little faults. So why do we zoom in on our flaws so quickly and so easily? We're overachievers on scouting out our flaws, and this holds us back. We need to dig deep, embrace our strengths and challenges, and recognize that all those things and all of our imperfections are actually purposeful. Rachi Lerner, Oheva Shalom, addressed this so beautifully. So, I'm reminded of something that we all know, which is, she said that every letter in the Torah has a place, it has a purpose. But can you imagine if the Yud looks over at the Vav and thinks, that Vav is so tall and thin, I want to be like the Vav. So if the Sofer changed every Yud to a Vav, the whole Torah is changed forever. So in the end, if you're doing what everyone else is doing, then you're doing it wrong. Honor your uniqueness and embrace your imperfections. Back to the story. Along her journey, Dorothy and company are faced with many forks in the yellow brick road, unsure of how to proceed, not knowing what dangers lie ahead. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Throughout B'nai Yisrael's journey, they're also faced with forks in the road. Yam Suf, Mitzrayim chasing, hunger, oh my. When approaching the Yam Suf, do they move forward? Do they turn back? When they experience hunger, should they return to Mitzrayim? So the takeaway for me is that when we are faced with decisions, we're always looking for the right choice. What is the consequence of our decisions? So this is still a work in progress for me. I'm trying to move away from looking at decisions as right or wrong and just see that each experience is based on the moment right before it, the decision preceding that moment, and it leads me to the next decision. So when we are at that fork in the road, each choice offers its own unique experience, and we can only do our best in the moment and embrace the experience that follows rather than suffer over whether or not we made the right or wrong decision. We should certainly base our decisions on good and reliable and relevant information. We should show a good learning curve from previous experiences, but then let go, move forward, and work with the experience that ensued from that decision. So many of my friends know that I'm obsessed with a psychologist by the name of Shefali Sarberry. She has a couple of books out there. She has a lot of YouTube videos. Oprah Winfrey is a big fan. And as I said, I'm completely obsessed. So much so that there was a period of time where Doug would call me from work and he's like, so what are you up to? And I'm like, I'm watching Shefali, right? So Shefali points out that often when parents are asked, what do you want for your children? They often respond, I want them to be happy. So she says that this response cheats our children out of many potential experiences, and these experiences are not any less purposeful in our lives. Glinda the Good Witch recognized this. She understood that Dorothy needed to face the challenges without swooping in every time to save her. God creates challenges for us and for our kids, and we are tasked with figuring out how to navigate the situation without his swooping in to solve the problem every single time. When our kids, and by the way, when I say kids, I mean children of all ages, including our adult children and grandchildren, when they are at a fork in the road or they're struggling, our instinct is to immediately swoop in with our capes and save the day. We're quick with advice or intervention. And as a result, we've trained our children to move away from adversity and challenges. And our kids have a hard time now sitting with discomfort. When we swoop in immediately and save the day, the happiness they experience is really, I think, temporary, because when they're faced with challenges in the future, we haven't given them the tools to work through it, and they were going to feel overwhelmed again. When our children face adversity and struggle and work through it, that's a higher form of satisfaction and happiness. Now, that doesn't mean we never help our kids or that we should never swoop in. In fact, we have to help and support and guide them along the way. We just don't need to take over and make the decisions for them. We can put more trust in letting them figure it out, and we actually may be surprised by their resiliency. I was speaking with Faggy Yort, somebody in our community. Many years ago, her daughter Sari, who I think was probably around the age of 10, was diagnosed with cancer, and she ultimately succumbed to it. But during the illness, Faggy spoke to God often, and she would say to him, okay, today I've got this, but it's getting hard. Tomorrow, can you take off some of the load? And sometimes she had to carry the load for extra days, and then she got relief, believing that God trusted her inner strength, and other times recognized when she needed more support. So life is just a series of decisions and experiences. And I often say to my kids, I was raised with the idea, take the road less traveled. But I tell my kids, don't worry about the road less traveled. Take the road with the most exit ramps. Don't be afraid to make a decision. And it's okay because most decisions can somehow be changed. So make the decision, and if you need to, get off at the next exit ramp and decide, should you go back on that route? Should you make a U-turn? Should you take a different route? I think that this takes the pressure off decision making, and we can also be more forgiving so that we can embrace the experience and lessons that comes with any of our choices. Back to the story. While in the forest, Dorothy and company believe that they are safe and yet are confronted by another evil force, the Wicked Witch of the West. The witch demands the ruby slippers be returned to the rightful owner, and Glinda and Dorothy's friends protect Dorothy. Along B'nai Israel's journey through the desert, B'nai Israel feels safe, and yet Amalek confronts them and wants to destroy them. Moshe's prayers and Yehoshua's army save them. So my takeaway is that there are external influences and events or people that feel destructive in our lives. We learn from Dorothy and B'nai Israel that God offers support, sometimes from very unexpected people and places in our lives. But you know what? It's also very hard for us to ask for help. So I laugh at this phenomenon because it happens so often at Shera. I would receive a phone call from a woman who said, Shera, I had such a hard couple of months. I was really stressed out. I was feeling depressed. It was just awful. So when I say to the woman, well, why wouldn't you call me then? She would say, no, it was too hard to do it. It's easier for me to talk about it now. So I would say to a woman, that kind of reminds me is if I had like this terrible headache or a migraine, and I know that there's extra strength Tylenol in the medicine cabinet, it would be as if I would say, no, I'm not going to take it now, but when I'm feeling better, I'm going to take it. So why do we do that? It's so difficult to ask for help in the moment of hardship. So I think the obvious answer is that it's just hard to be vulnerable. I had another woman who called Shera, and she said that she had just been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. So I told her that she should think about putting her support network into place. And she goes, yeah, that's not going to happen because I'm always the giver, never the taker. When something's going on in the community, I make the meals, I drive extra carpools, I'll shop. I'm a giver, not a taker. So I said to her, you know what? In all the years that I've been working at Shera, I never had a woman say, this is going to be great because I'm always the taker. It seems to me that every woman who's ever called Shera happens to be a giver. So if every woman's a giver, who's doing all the taking? Unfortunately, it's your turn. We will each take a turn in the world of adversity and struggle. We have our solid people in our lives, and in addition to this, help from others may come from the most unlikeliest of places. So even though the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion aren't the typical staples in Dorothy's posse, these three friends always had Dorothy's back. As hard as it feels, many of us need to work on accepting help and letting people into our lives. So in my life, I have learned not to pass so quickly on a possible friend or somebody I don't know because that person is different from me. It could be that this person is the very one who's going to help me through my struggles. Back to the story. Dorothy and her new friends placed all their bets on the wizard to make them whole again. Dorothy returning home, the Tin Man with his heart, the Scarecrow with his brain, and the Cowardly Lion with courage. As we later learned, the wizard is a false idol, a mere mortal with no power to deliver that which they are all seeking. Similarly, as Moshe is on Har Sinai, Bnei Israel loses patience and builds a false idol, the golden calf, placing their hopes on this false idol to bring them salvation. So my takeaway is that false idols are never the answer. In today's day and age, Avodah Zarah still exists. There's the Avodah Zarah of money and material, and the Avodah Zarah of status, the Avodah Zarah of social media to impress people. Many years ago, my husband, Doug, worked at a very large public company, not where he works today, and he was on the corporate jet with the CEO when the CEO gets a call that he was being told that he outbid other people on a very expensive piece of artwork. And when the CEO finished the call, he turned to Doug and he says, "You're not impressed by all this," as he's pointing to the private jet. To which Doug responded, "You know what? I'm incredibly impressed by what you have achieved in your career, but not by what you own." At which point the CEO says, "Yeah, that's one of the things I hate about you." So when Doug and I got married, he moved into my apartment and he suggested a rule that if something comes into the house, something leaves. He's very anti-clutter. And this rule worked well because it forced me to think, is this object worth buying if I have to get rid of something? So in any case, when we were moving out and moving to Teaneck, everything was almost on the trunk, and I said to him, "Wait, we have to take the things out of the attic." And he replied, "I didn't even know there was an attic." So he proceeded to throw everything out that was in the attic, including the file cabinet with every paper I wrote in college and graduate school. He threw out things that I had since childhood. And when I objected, he said, why should we continue to move from one attic to another? So in all the years that you lived here, did you ever look at them? And it was very hard to get rid of some things that belonged to my deceased mom that were decorative, not functional. And I realized that these things didn't ultimately make me feel closer to my mom, so why was I holding on to them? Having moved several times since, I can't believe how much I throw out with each move. So Doug really gave me a new perspective on lessening my valuing of material things and my attachment to them. So, by the way, the theory of getting rid of something if we bring another thing new into the house was great until we had our second child, and I was worried that Doug would suggest rotating our children in the house. So 1 week Sophie, maybe another time Harry. Okay, back to the story. So when Dorothy and company arrive in Emerald City and eventually meet the wizard, they ultimately discover that they already had what they were seeking. Glinda explains that Dorothy always had the power to go home. Dorothy just needed to appreciate what home was, and that's why she had to go on the journey. In short, it was the journey to Emerald City, sticking to the yellow brick road, and successfully confronting the challenges along the way that allowed the development from which they thought they lacked. They needed the challenge. They needed to be pushed beyond their comfort zones. They needed to be on a path that would provide those sometimes very scary developmental experiences. They discovered gifts and talents where they might have only seen weaknesses and flaws. Moshe was a great and revered ruler, but ultimately the power didn't reside in Moshe. From the very beginning of the journey, Hashem, who is in fact all-powerful, could have taken the children of Israel to Eretz Yisrael, but he didn't. They needed to go on the journey to prepare them to appreciate, to live in their holy homeland. After years of slavery, the children of Israel were not really sure who they were. They had a slave mentality. They had to figure out who they were and where they were going. In order to do this, they needed to access their brains and their hearts and their courage before returning home to Eretz Yisrael. So my takeaway is that I believe that the theme of The Wizard of Oz and Maggid invite us to ask, who am I? Where am I going? And how do I keep moving forward? Ultimately, if we look back on our lives, we will realize that it's always the hardest times that make us who we are. So I want to end with a beautiful interaction that I had with a caller from Shera. So one day I'm in the office and I pick up the phone and this woman was sobbing. And okay, so she finally catches her breath and she says, you know, I feel so damaged. I look at my body and all I see is cancer. When I look in the mirror, my eyes immediately go to the scars and to my bald head. Who is this person looking back at me? I'm disconnected from my body. I'm disconnected spiritually because all I see is a ruin of who I once was. And that's how that conversation began with this woman who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. She called me at Shera years earlier looking for support and guidance. And at that point, it was clear to me that she was a vibrant, active, deeply spiritual woman. And in between caring for her husband and young children, she went to shiurim, and she would walk away wealthy with inspiration and chizuk to move forward as she lived with this frightening diagnosis. And move forward, she did. Over the years, she continued to face this disease with inner strength and humor. And she stayed active and connected to her family and to her community, to her learning, and with God. And she, over time, did ask questions, attempting to find meaning, and was persistent in reaching out and asking for help to find the right resources until she found a place of calm and emunah. So to hear her say that she was spiritually disconnected and use the words damaged and ruined really shook me to my core. So I've seen others who were physically, emotionally, and spiritually tapped out as they lived through this disease. And I get it. They were each asked to dig deep and find the strength to move forward. This woman pushed herself to stay connected, and until now, it worked for her. So it took her a few moments for her to regain her composure. And when I heard her breath stabilize, I said, okay, so there's this place. It's a room. It's damaged and broken. And this place has sat for centuries, serving as a reminder of the glory and splendor that it once was. And yet, millions of people flock here to this room to connect spiritually. When people are struggling and lost, many find their way to this deeply holy place. Millions of people have spoken words of prayer and have found hope at this very spot. Actually, this place, it's just a wall, a damaged and broken rune. Yet this rune, this damaged wall, is precious and cherished. We are in awe as we stand before it. In the meantime, the wall stands damaged and glorious. So she remained silent for a moment as, she really, I think, took in those words. And with renewed strength, and I could hear it in her voice, she goes, I am the kotel. The cancer may touch my body, but it can't penetrate my soul. And with this, she continued to move forward, reconnected and full of glory. There are times in our lives when each one of us will feel damage or has felt damage, and maybe even ruined. We have the potential and the capacity to find our strengths and our spirit and our ability to keep moving forward. So I wish all of us meaningful journeys ahead, relying on our brains and our hearts and our courage to navigate the challenges, to help us find ourselves and our purpose and return us to our truth, because there's no place like home, especially now.
Thank you so much, Shera. That was really fantastic. And as I sit here in your former home, which I know and joy is mine, really, I just want to say thank you. That was really, really fantastic. And I'll unmute everybody so they can say their thank yous as well if they'd like. And belated happy birthday. Shera's birthday was yesterday. So belated happy birthday to you as well.
Thank you, Shera.
Thank you, Shera. Happy birthday.
Thanks,
Happy birthday.
Shera.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thanks, Shera.
Pleasure.
That was fun. My what? That was fun.
It was really terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Right. We gotta get out of it.